Hello and welcome to SystemVerilog in 5 minutes. Today we'll talk about compiler directives. Compiler directives are also known as defines and macros. It is denoted by a backtick. One common macro is include. To make it easier to understand, you may want to treat a macro as a text management tool. In this example, this is module A in file a.sv and this is module test in test.sv. Test uses A. If you are using VCS, this is the compilation command. Now let's say we add more files and modules. The command needs to change as well. One way to avoid changing the command is to use tick include. Here we include the files used by module test, and the command simply needs to compile test.sv. All the other files are found through the tick include. It is almost as if the contents of the file are right there in the include line. Using tick include creates another problem. This example has module test and module test 1. They both use module A and they both include a.sv. If you compile these two files, a.sv would be compiled twice and that would result in compilation error. To mitigate this issue, we can use if not def macro. This represents if not defined. And there is another version if def, which means if defined. It checks if the identifier is defined. Thus, it can be used as a content filter. First time a.sv is compiled, this statement is true and therefore the content filter is lifted, and module A is compiled. Note that the content has one extra statement. That statement defines a_sv. So the second time a.sv is compiled, this statement is not true and therefore the filter is applied, as if this becomes an empty file. So module A is not being recompiled again. It is recommended that you write one module or one class in a file and use the if not def mechanism to avoid multiple compiles. Other than file management, we can also use the macro to filter content. In this example, if we assume this is a design, O is either driven by one AND gate or by one OR gate. Now you may ask, what is the difference between if def macro and if statement? Here is an example using if statement. This statement represents one AND gate, and this statement is one OR gate, and this whole block is a multiplexer, and this is the resulting system. Comparatively, in this module, only one of the logic gate can exist. If you compile it this way, there would be one OR gate. If you compile it this way with a plus defined cell, there would be one AND gate. This system is runtime configurable, but it has more components, and the data path is longer, meaning propagation delay is longer. Tick define can be used to create macros. Look at this example. You can replace this statement by a macro. This is how you create a macro. This is the identifier, and after that is the content it replaces. Now you can use the macro like this. This is the same as randomizing A. If you want to replace these two statements, you need to combine them into one line for the macro. Or you can use backslash to indicate the next line is also part of the macro. But this is not a very pretty code. Now if you use the macro like this, it randomizes A and displays A. This may look like a function or task, but it is not. It is a text replacement tool and can replace any text. For example, it can replace an initial block. Now, like it is not confusing enough, a macro can have arguments. Look at this code. There are a few variables, A, A0 and A1, B, B0 and B1. We can create a macro to declare them. Say this is the macro. The I here is an argument. If we use the macro like this is the same as declaring logic A, A0 and A1, and this is declaring logic B, B0 and B1. Note the double ticks here. This one does not require double ticks, and yet these tools have them. The rule is any standalone word same as the argument is treated as a macro argument. But if it is not a standalone word, it won't be treated as a macro argument. If you define the macro this way without backticks, this is the result when you use it with A. I is replaced by A, but I0 and I1 remains the same. You may complain why this is so confusing and inconsistent, but you would appreciate that logic here does not become logag. If you want to be consistent, you can always use double ticks. However, this makes it less pretty. Alright, today we've discussed about compiler directives. I have only one advice: use it with care.